Ms. Fontane, you testified before the Inspector General of Chicago on March 16th, 2016. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
You testified at their offices at 300 West Adams on the 8th floor of that day, didn't you?
Yes.
You were there with your lawyer, Jen Russell, weren't you? I'm sorry, I didn't hear that.
Yes, if that's what document says.
And there were two men from the Inspector General's office that day, Mr. Peter Newmer and a Mr. Christopher Brown, right?
Yes.
And besides all of those people, there was a court reporter there, right?
Yes.
Mr. Right there, page 174, 175. Page 174, 175.
Thank you.
Question, and by the way, you were placed under oath at this statement you gave to the Inspector General, right?
Yes.
Which means you raised your right hand and you swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right?
Yes.
While you were under oath on March 16, 2016, at the Inspector General's office downtown, with your lawyer sitting next to you, were you asked these questions? Did you give these answers? Question. Did you see him? Did you see McDonald on the night of October 20th, 2014 make any attacking movements towards Officer Van Dyke? Answer, yes. Question. Tell us about those attacking movements. Answer, well, he was walking southbound, swinging the knife. Ms. Fontane, were you asked those questions? Did you give those answers under oath at the Inspector General on March 16, 2016?
If that's what it says, or yes.
You saw as McDonald was walking down the middle, you know what, let me stop you right there. Officer Fontane, do you see anything wrong with McDonald walking down the middle of Pulaski that night?
With the knife?
Yes. How about without the knife? Is there anything wrong about this man walking down Pulaski that night?
Yes.
It's odd, isn't it?
Yes.
You're not supposed to walk down the middle of a major thoroughfare like Pulaski near 41st Street. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
And this guy was walking down the middle of Pulaski, armed with that knife you described with the shiny blade, right?
Yes.
So, as he was walking down the middle of Pulaski, going southbound, would you agree that as he's walking southbound, to McDonald's left would be east, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And you saw McDonald face east, correct?
Twist. Mm-hmm.
I'm sorry.
Yes, when he twisted.
He faced east, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Get to say yes or no.
Yes.
And when he faced east, that's the direction where Officer Van Dyke and Officer Walsh were standing, right?
Yes.
So he faced Officer Van Dyke and Officer Walsh. Isn't that correct?
At the moment he twisted, yes.
In fact, you described at times he was facing sideways, correct?
Yes.
And by the way, you heard several commands by your fellow officers for McDonald to drop the knife. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
You can't even recall how many times you heard officers yell, drop the knife, right?
Correct.
You didn't tell McDonald to drop the knife?
No.
And by the way, to be clear, the other officers who were yelling at McDonald to drop the knife, they said those commands before McDonald fell. Isn't that right?
I'm not sure exactly when I heard it.
You sure?
Yes.
Well, you testified at Jason Van Dyke's trial on September 17, 2018, right?
Yes.
I'm sorry, what date? September?
September 17th, 2018, Judge.
Thank you.
In this building, right?
Yes.
In Judge Gaughan's courtroom, right?
Yes.
And Jason Van Dyke and his lawyers were there, right?
Yes.
And the special prosecutor in that case were there, correct?
Yes.
And you were under oath at that time too, correct?
Yes.
And when I say under oath again, you swore to tell the truth that day, correct?
Yes.
Just like you did in front of the Inspector General in June of 2017, right?
Yes.
And just like you're doing today, right?
Yes.
Well, page 64. While you were under oath, just 2 months ago,
Yes.
in this building, were you asked these questions to give these answers? Question: did you hear any commands they give to him? Answer: yes. What did you hear? Answer: I hear drop the knife, drop the knife. Question: is that before he falls or after he falls? Answer: before. We asked those questions. Did you give those answers under oath on September 17th, 2018 in this building?
Yes.
You saw Ms. Fontane, you saw McDonald moving closer to Officer Walsh and Officer Van Dyke, isn't that right?
No.
I want to take you back to the date of January the 8th, 2015. Okay, Ms. Fontane?
Yes.
Which, by the way, is just a couple of months after this incident. Agreed?
Yes.
And since it was just a couple months after the incident, the events would be fresh in your mind, wouldn't they?
It was a dramatic event, but yes.
Well, I didn't ask you if it was dramatic. I'm saying the events were still fresh in your mind, correct?
Yes.
On that date, you met with FBI agents, didn't you?
Yes.
And you met with FBI agents at the Cook County State's Attorney's Office in this building. Isn't that right?
Yes.
On the 13th floor of this building, right?
Yes.
And you met with an assistant statesman named William Delaney, didn't you?
I don't recall who.
You don't recall. Okay. But nevertheless, whatever that statesman's name is, there were 2 FBI agents with that statesman. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
One agent was named Jeffrey Guagliardo, Guagliardo, and a special agent named Courtney Corbett, right?
I've been investigated. I've been interviewed for so many people. I don't remember names.
I'm sorry, did you say you've been investigated?
Or I've been questioned.
Well, there were 2 FBI agents, a man and a woman, with the state's attorney that day, right?
Yes.
And those FBI agents were taking notes.
Yes.
Thank you. And during that interview with FBI agents, did you say on January 8th, 2015, that you saw the offender moving closer to the officer, waving the knife, while being told to put it down, but he did not comply? Did you say that to those FBI agents and that state's attorney on January the 8th, 2015?
If that's what that says, yes.
And you know, Ms. Fontane, that it's a crime to lie to an FBI agent, right?
Yes.
And would you agree, Ms. Fontane, that from your angle, with Vera Montez next to you, from your angle, it looked like McDonald was coming closer to you?
My partner was not next to me.
Okay, I'll rephrase. From your angle only, it looked like McDonald was walking towards you.
He was walking southbound. Yes, He was walking south.
Miss Fontaine. Well, I got to direct your attention back to that June date in 2016 before the Inspector General, okay?
Yes.
Again, with your attorney
Yes.
that afternoon. And those two Inspector Generals, Mr. Newmer and Mr. Brown, right?
Yes, if that's,
Okay. And again, you were under oath.
yes.
Page 178, guys. We asked this question, and did you give this answer under oath on March 16, 2016? Mr. Newmer, okay. Answer. When I arrived on scene, I didn't realize until I saw the video I was still in the vehicle. So by the angle I'm in, he's walking southbound, but because he's straight and I'm in the angle and Van Dyke and Joe are out there of their car, it almost seems to me as if he was walking towards them. Did you give that answer under oath on March 16, 2016? So McDonald was walking towards Joe Walsh and Officer Van Dyke that day, right?
If that's what I testified.
And that's what you said under oath.
Yes.
All right, Ms. Fontaine. Agree with me or not? On the night you saw Laquan McDonald on Pulaski with that knife, walking down Pulaski, he was an assailant, wasn't he?
Yes.
He was an armed assailant, wasn't he?
Yes.
And you knew, strike that, you learned. You didn't know when you first pulled up, but you learned that this armed assailant stabbed the tire of Officer Gaffney and Officer McElligot's police SUV. Isn't that right?
Yes, eventually.
And after it happened, did you go check out that SUV with that flat tire?
I don't recall.
Did you check out the windshield with the damage on that police Tahoe?
I don't remember.
Well, would you agree with me that as long as McDonald had that knife, he was a threat? Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And he was so much of a threat that you had your hand on your gun, correct?
Yes.
You didn't draw it, though, but you had your hand on it, correct?
Yes.
All right, now, you've never met David Marks before that night, correct?
Correct.
You've never talked to him before that night, correct?
Correct.
You haven't talked to him since, isn't that correct?
Correct.
Now, as a detective, he is notified to go to a crime scene by somebody from the district who got there first, right?
Correct.
You didn't notify Detective Marks, did you?
Mm.
Yeah. Somebody did, though, right?
Yes.
And several minutes later, 20, 30 minutes later, detectives started showing up to the crime scene, right?
Yes.
And by this time, were you working traffic, or were you supposed to follow McDonald to the hospital, or were you already assigned a paper car?
I don't recall.
Okay. Well, you agree with me that this incident happened very quickly, correct?
Yes.
Now, when Detective March, strike that, before Detective March interviewed you at the scene, there were no conversations you had with any other 8th District police officers. Isn't that right?
Besides the beats and stars?
Right.
Yes.
So to be clear, besides getting their beat numbers and their star numbers, you did not talk to any other 8th District police officer about what had just happened.
No, not there.
And you didn't hear any police officers talk about what had just happened, right?
People were talking.
You can't tell us what you heard, if anything, though, can you?
No.
Thank you. Now, you told us on direct examination that Detective March came up to you while you were on the street with Officer Viramontes, right?
Yes.
And he learned when he first met you that you were the paper car, right?
Yes.
And by paper car, that means you were assigned by one of your 8th District supervisors to write up this original case incident report, right?
Correct.
Dave Marks didn't tell you to write that report. Your sergeant or somebody above him did, correct?
Yes.
That's what the paper car means. You write the first police report, correct?
Yes.
And it was during this first meeting that you expressed to Dave March that you saw what happened.
Yes.
And when Dave March found that out, he separated you from Officer Viramontes, correct?
Yes.
And he interviewed you separate from Officer Viramontes, right?
Yes.
And conversely, after your interview, he interviewed Officer Viramontes separate from you, right?
Yes.
And when that interview began, Detective March said, okay, what did you see, right?
Yes.
And you told him what you saw.
Yes.
And the events just happened. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Okay. The events happened, what, 20, 30 minutes earlier, right?
I'm not sure how long.
Now, you told this court on direct examination that regarding that police report that you filled out, you told this court that Dave March told you what to put in that report?
Some of the information, yes.
Some of the information?
Yes.
What?
The victims,
The victim.
the title.
And who the offender was.
I'm not sure about the offender. I didn't know if I got it over the PDT or he gave it to me.
Oh. And the offender regarding your papers, right there. The offender regarding your police report named Laquan McDonald.
Yes.
So that might have come from the PDT and not David March. Is that what you're telling us?
Yes.
So David March didn't tell us right there. It's quite possible David March did not tell you McDonald's the offender.
Sure.
And as far as who the victims were, when David March is interviewing you, you have no idea what happened
No.
back at 40th and Keeler and Kildare and all of Karloff, right?
Exactly.
You didn't talk to Officer McGilligan or Officer Gaffney, right?
Sure.
That's the detective's job, isn't it?
Yes.
So, based on your experience, it's usually the case that the detective tells the paper car, in this case you, what to put in the report, right?
Yes.
There's nothing unusual about it.
No.
There's nothing criminal about it, right? There's nothing dishonest about it, right?
No.
In fact, you need to get information from the detective for that report. Isn't that right?
Yes.
It's protocol for the detective to tell you who the victim is, correct?
Yes.
It may be protocol as well, depending on whether it's a human being or a PDT, to learn who the offender is, correct?
Yes.
So nobody was putting words in your mouth, right?
No. It's just gathering information.
And then you started doing your report, correct?
Yes.
At that scene, right?
Yes.
On the computer.
Yes. Yes,
in your squad car.
yes.
And you completed that report in about 1 hour.
I don't know exactly how long it took us.
Well, maybe there's something to refresh your recollection, okay?
Okay,
I'm going to refer you now to the special grand jury testimony you gave on June 26th of 2017. Is that all right?
yes,
And you testified before that special grand jury with Ms. Holmes, Mr. Watson, Ms. Warner, Ms. Kelso, and Ms. Gasparka from Ms. Holmes' team. Isn't that correct?
yes,
They were in that grand jury with you, right?
yes,
And your lawyer, Jen Russell, was there with you that day, but just outside, wasn't she?
yes,
While you testified.
yes,
And before you testified, you also raised your right hand that day.
yes,
Swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
yes,
Just like you did today.
yes.
But before that sworn testimony, you gave testimony before the Inspector General.
Yes,
You got to say yes or no.
sorry.
And
Yes,
by the way, just to be clear, you testified before the Inspector General more than one day, didn't you?
yes,
There you go. And page 110. When you were testifying before the Inspector General under oath, were you asked this question? Did you give this answer? Question. How long did it take you to complete this case report? Answer. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Question. Give me your best estimate. Answer. Maybe an hour. Question. Hour? Answer. Maybe. Because we were waiting for the stuff to come to us from the district. We asked those questions. Did you give those answers under oath before the Inspector General on March 16, 2016?
Indicated it's about an hour to the question prior to you.
No, she said she didn't recall.
that's overruled.
And to be clear, Ms. Fontane, you completed that report at the scene before going to the area, right?
Yes,
Now, earlier today, you called McDonald by his first name, right?
yes,
Now, when you were testifying before the special grand jury, you were calling him an offender, weren't you?
yes,
And would you agree with me, Ms. Fontane, Laquan McDonald was an offender that night, wasn't he?
again, it depends on at what point in time he was an offender on the report, so I called him an offender.
And did you ever meet and interview a man named Rudy Barillas?
No,
Did Laquan McDonald take that knife with that shiny blade and jam it into the tires of your squad car that night?
no,
Did he take that knife with that blade and jam it onto the windshield of your squad car that night?
no,
You know what an aggravated assault is, don't you?
yes,
Now, you testified before the federal grand jury in this case, didn't you?
yes.
And what you told the federal grand jury was the truth, wasn't it?
I've always said the truth.
Okay. But by the way, do you know what perjury is?
Yes,
Perjury is lying while under oath, isn't that correct?
yes,
Would you agree with me? Victim does not necessarily mean injured, correct?
exactly.
So if I'm a victim of an aggravated assault, I don't have to be injured, correct?
Correct.
If I'm a victim of an aggravated assault, it does not mean I was battered, correct?
Correct.
If I'm a victim of an attempted murder, it doesn't mean I have to be injured, correct?
Correct.
If I'm a victim of an armed robbery or a robbery, it doesn't mean I'm injured, correct?
Correct.
May I approach?
You may.
Ms. Fontane, I'm going to show you an exhibit we have already marked as defense march exhibit number 7. Okay? Is that the document Ms. Holmes showed you earlier?
Yes.
Mr. McKay, for the record, what is that document?
Well, I'm going to ask the state if they can put theirs on the screen. That paper document is march exhibit number 7.
I understand that, but what is it?
Ms. Fontane, does that appear to be a general progress report written by somebody that has your name at the top of it?
Yes.
Your Honor, just for the record, it is also People's Exhibit March GPR 1, and it is being displayed.
Thank you. And Mr. Safer, could you have your assistant highlight the one line that was highlighted during direct? Okay. Ms. Fontane, when you talked to David Martin, he was taking down notes, right?
Yes.
And you've seen this document before, correct?
Yes.
You've seen the document that's in front of you, the paper copy, right?
Yes.
And it's true. It's right there. What you're saying today is that all of these things that Dave March wrote, you said with the exception of one line. Is that correct?
Yes.
Right. And that line starts, O ignored, raised our arm, meaning right arm, toward VD, Van Dyke, as if attacking Van Dyke. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
All right, and Ms. Fontane, to further specify that sentence, it's offender ignored, raised right arm toward Van Dyke as if attacking Van Dyke. True?
Yes.
So right now you're saying to this court, you said all of these things to Mr. March, except that one sentence.
Yes.
And yet, isn't it true, Ms. Fontane, that even part of the sentence you said, for example, the first part where it says, "Oh, ignored, offender ignored," you see that?
Offender ignored, yes.
Yeah, well, Ms. Fontane, you saw Mr. McDonald ignoring police commands to drop the knife, correct? Strike that. You heard several police commands for McDonald to drop the knife, right?
Yes.
He didn't drop the knife, did he?
No.
So he ignored the police commands to drop the knife, correct?
Yes.
That's true. That's fact. McDonald ignored police commands. True?
True.
So that part of the sentence, offender ignored, is not only true, you said that part at least. True?
No, I did not say that.
You did not say offender ignored the police commands.
No.
But you both agree, we'll agree that McDonald did ignore those commands, right?
Okay, you're asking me two different questions.
Well, then let me specify. Tonight, you will agree with me, won't you, that McDonald did ignore the police commands. Isn't that right?
Yes.
But you're saying that you didn't say this to March.
No.
So what you're saying then is March wrote down something that is true. You just didn't say it. Is that right?
If that's the way you're phrasing it, yes.
Okay. Now, the next part, it says raised right arm toward Van Dyke. You see that?
Yes.
All right. Now, you're telling us that you didn't say that to David March.
Correct. Yes.
Now, see the pen I got?
Yes.
Pretend it's not, okay?
Okay.
Tell me if what I'm doing is raising my right arm, okay?
Okay. Yes, that's raising your arm.
And my arm is raised about my waist level, right?
Just for the record, you raised your right arm from being down at your side up, and you raised it in a motion to your side, to your right, up to about waist level.
Thank you, Judge. In swinging the knife, like if I do this, watch this. If I take my right arm and I do this, aren't I raising my right arm from my side?
Yes.
For the record, Mr. McKay, you had your right arm down at your side. You lifted it up to approximately waist level and moved your right arm from side to side, bending it at your elbow, moving it from left to right and right to left.
Thank you. And that night when you saw McDonald, that's what you saw.
I did not.
But I'm sorry, you just told us earlier he was swaying his arm, right?
He was swaying it, not raising it as if attacking.
Hold on for just a second.
Yes.
During Ms. Holmes's question, she asked you, did you see McDonald raise his arm to his shoulder? Do you remember that question?
Yes.
You didn't say that, right?
I said no.
And more importantly, David March didn't write that, did he?
Not there.
Nowhere does he write that McDonald raised his right arm to his shoulder, correct?
Correct.
And Ms. Holmes asked you earlier, did you see McDonald raise his right arm above his head? You remember that question?
Yes.
And you didn't see that, did you?
No.
And you didn't say that to David March, did you?
That he raised it.
And more importantly, David March didn't write that McDonald raised his arm over his head. Isn't that true?
That's correct.
And Ms. Holmes said, did you see McDonald lunge at Van Dyke? You remember that question?
Yes.
You didn't see him lunge, isn't that right?
Correct.
You didn't say he lunged towards Van Dyke, correct?
Correct.
And more importantly, David March did not write McDonald lunged at Van Dyke, correct?
Correct.
And when Ms. Holmes asked you a question, did you see McDonald attack Van Dyke? You didn't see that, did you?
No.
You didn't say that to David March, did you?
No.
And David March didn't write, you saw McDonald attack Van Dyke, correct?
Correct.
Ms. Holmes asked you, did you see McDonald charge at Van Dyke? Do you remember that question?
Yes.
You did not see McDonald charge at Van Dyke, right?
Exactly.
You did not say you saw McDonald charge at Van Dyke, right?
Yes.
And more importantly, you don't see that David March wrote McDonald charge at Van Dyke, right?
Correct.
When Mondragon texted you and you read in the papers, did you think, just by reading this line, did you think that March was writing McDonald raised the knife over his head or at his shoulder? Is that what you thought when you read the line?
Yes.
But that's not what's in the report, correct?
It says it raised his right arm.
But not over the shoulder or over the head, right?
No.
You just misinterpreted what Dave March wrote when you read about it in the newspapers, right? Right?
Sorry. Okay. When I read it, it read as raise his arm as if attacking Van Dyke. Again, with all the questionings, all the interviews I've been given, everything. You're right. There's little things like this that people interpret different.
That's only human, isn't that right, Ms. Fontane? Human interpretation of somebody else's writings, right? Do you understand that?
Yes, but I did not say that.
Well, I'm not saying you said it, but what I'm asking you is, isn't it true? Dave March didn't write it that way. Do you understand the question?
Yes.
Dave March did not write McDonald raised that knife either to his shoulder or over his head. Isn't that right?
That's been asked and answered. Move on.
And let's be clear, everything else in this handwritten report of your interview that happened that night, everything else you did say to David March, correct?
Yes.
You didn't hear what Vera Montes told Dave March next, did you?
No.
Now, are you saying today with certainty, with absolute certainty, that you did not say to David March, the offender ignored, raises right arm towards Van Dyke as if attacking Van Dyke? Are you saying that with certainty today?
That I did not say that? Yes.
Okay. I want to direct your attention again to the Inspector General's sworn interview of you on March 16th, 2016. Okay?
Yes.
And again, to reiterate, you were there with Mr. Brown and Mr. Newmer, correct?
Yes.
And you were there with Jen Russell, correct?
Yes.
And there was a court reporter there, isn't that right?
Yes.
And you were sworn to tell the truth before that interview started.
Yes.
Page 92. While you were under oath on March 16th, 2016, were you asked this question? Did you give this answer? Question. And in what way does it differ? Answer. It differs because by looking at his notes, there's where he puts that I said he raised his arm as if attacking Van Dyke. I never stated that, or I don't recall stating that to him. Were you asked that question, and did you give that answer under oath on March 16, 2016?
If that's what it says, yes.
Are you one of those special people that their memories get better in time? Or are you like the rest of us, where when the thing is fresh in our mind, our statements are more accurate?
I've always answered the right way,
That's
the
not my
correct way.
question. Does your memory get better in time?
It's the same.
I want to direct your attention out to the area. After the scene, after talking to David March, you went to the area, didn't you?
Yes.
And when you were at the area, there were other 8th District police officers there. Isn't that correct?
Yes.
And isn't it true that while you were at the area, you heard no one talking about the case at the area?
Correct.
You told us earlier on direct examination that while you were at the area, you went to a room with Detective March and another individual.
Yes.
Who was that other individual?
I don't know.
Well, what did he look like? Or strike it. What did he or she look like?
It was a male?
Okay. Anything else?
No,
No, he's just a male.
that was it.
When you were at the academy, going back to 2001, did you have a class where the officers, did you have a class in the academy where the recruits are taught how to describe people?
Yes. I had been under stress. I've never seen anybody get shot in front of me. So,
Are you
yes.
done? I didn't ask you about stress or whether anybody was shot in front of you. I just asked you if you had that class about describing.
Yes.
Now, when you went through that video review with Detective March, this other person, whoever he was he the one that was, moving the mouse to start and stop the video?
Yes.
And you were then watching the video with Detective March.
Yes,
And there was very little questioning, right?
yes,
David March didn't ask you a lot of questions in that video room, right?
no,
But during this video, he just asked you, just simply, is this where he turned? Is this the point where you see him turning?
yes,
And did you say, yeah, that's where he's turning,
yes,
right? He didn't force you to say that, did he?
no,
He didn't direct you to say that, did he?
no,
He didn't tell you to say McDonald was turning, right?
no,
He showed you a part of the video and you agreed that McDonald was turning.
yes,
You weren't coerced in any way to say the point of the video where McDonald was turning, right?
correct, yes,
During the video, you saw that it looked, the video was so accurate in your mind, it looked like McDonald was walking sideways with his body facing east, right?
he was walking, yes,
And he was facing east, correct?
when you twisted, yes,
Well, I didn't say twist, I said facing east. Is
Yes.
that what you saw in that video with David Marsh the night at the area?
yes,
You said east.
yes,
Okay. And when you said east, that's the same direction where Joe Walsh and Van Dyke were standing.
yes,
Now, you told us today that when you learned in the newspapers what David March wrote, you said, "What the fuck?"
yes,
I take it then you were upset.
yes,
Now, let me ask you this, because counsel asked you, what did you do next? And you said you called your lawyer. I want to ask you what you didn't do next, okay? Ms. Fontane, after you learned about David March's handwritten report where you disagree with one sentence in that report, you never filed a supplementary report written by you addressing that error. Isn't that correct?
correct,
And by supplementary report, I mean either you type on a computer a supplementary report, right?
it's paper,
Or it's a handwritten report, right?
yes,
Nothing stopped you from doing that after you learned what Dave March wrote, correct?
correct,
Heck, you never even contacted Dave March to tell him you didn't agree with the one sentence in that report, correct?
correct,
You didn't contact him to ask him to change his report, right?
correct,
You didn't contact his supervisors and tell them or ask them to order Dave March to change that report, right?
correct,
You didn't tell your supervisors at the 8th District to have Dave March change his report, correct?
Correct.
You didn't have your supervisors at the 8th District to contact Dave March's supervisors at Area Central to have Dave March's report correct. Corrected, correct?
Correct.
Correct. You never even asked a supervisor to get a CR number against Dave March, right?
Correct.
And what's a CR number?
It's a number's taken out for investigation.
What does CR stand for?
I'm sorry, I don't
You don't know.
know.
Complaint register number. Does that sound about right?
Yes,
You had some, haven't you?
yes,
And by the way, our D number, remember the questions Ms. Holmes said, our D number?
RD,
Yeah. What does the D stand for?
report. I'm sorry, I'm going blank.
How about records division number? Does that sound about right?
Yes,
You've been a police officer for
17 years.
Okay. When you learned about this one sentence in this report that you disagreed with David March about, you didn't contact the Bureau of Internal Affairs, did you?
No,
Isn't there a general order that imposes a duty on a police officer to correct a false report?
yes,
You didn't do that in this case, did you?
no,
So you violated that general order. Isn't that right?
I contacted my lawyer.
Yeah, but your lawyer is not with the police department, right?
Yes,
So you violated that general order, didn't you?
yes,
So you should be fired, shouldn't you? Ms. Fontane,
yes,
I know this isn't easy, but let's be a little bit more candid here. When you talk to Dave March, you hadn't seen the video, right?
no,
And so you talked to David March for a few minutes down the street without seeing the video, correct?
Correct.
And there's a lot going through your mind that night, right?
yes,
Like you said earlier, you've never seen a police involved shooting, right?
yes,
And this is a stressful event, isn't it?
yes,
And like you, every police officer out there that night are merely human beings with all the things that make us human. Isn't that right?
correct,
Stress, right? Excitement, right?
correct,
Adrenaline, right?
correct,
Fear, right?
correct,
Confusion.
yes,
And this incident, like you told us, it happened so quickly, didn't it?
yes,
And you did not have the time to reassess, look at video, and then tell David March what you said, right? Sorry, and then tell David March what you saw, right?
correct,
You can't be expected, it's right there, no one can be expected to give an interview under those conditions without the benefit of video beforehand to be completely accurate. Would you agree?
correct,
So, isn't it fair to say that when you're talking to David March, you're telling David March what happened to the best of your ability at that moment under those conditions?
yes,
And as a result, as a human being, you're telling David March what you thought you saw, correct?
I told him what I saw.
And you also told him what you thought you saw, right?
That's what I saw.
Well, in your 51 years, has it never happened to you where you thought something happened and then you see it later on, either in a video or a photograph, and you realize that you got that one fact wrong? That never happened to you?
What I saw that night is what I said.
I didn't ask you that. I'm asking you, in your lifetime, did you ever describe something or try to remember something only to see a photograph or video later on and realize it was something else?
Yes.
Thank you. That happens to all of us, doesn't it?
Does it happen to you? Yeah.
So isn't it possible? Isn't it possible that when you talk to David March, you told him things that were only corrected by the video later? Isn't that possible?
That statement I did not say.
You told us tonight that somebody is calling you a rat or a snitch or that you can't be trusted. Is that right?
Correct.
Let's be clear. While you are under oath, there is no evidence whatsoever that David March has anything to do with that alleged communication. Isn't that correct?
I never said that.
I'm asking you, isn't it true that David March has nothing, strike you have no evidence whatsoever that David March has anything to do with those accusations you just made tonight?
Correct.
Thank you. In fact, you have no idea who is calling you a rat or a snitch or not trustworthy behind your back, right?
I've been given some names.
You have never heard from those people whose names you were given that they were calling you a rat or a snitch or untrustworthy, right?
They won't tell me to my face.
So you don't have any personal knowledge that those unknown people ever said those things to you. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
And by the way, your bosses at work are treating you pretty nice, aren't they?
I never said they weren't. They're wonderful.
And your current assignment, review assignment, you sit behind a desk, correct?
Yes.
You shuffle paperwork, right?
Yes.
Straight days, right?
Yes.
You prefer that assignment, don't you?
Now I do.
Judge, I need a moment.
All right, take your time.
Thank you, Judge. There's nothing further.
Okay, Mr. Fahey or Mr. Pugh?
Thanks.
Good evening, Officer Fontane.
Good evening.
My name is Todd Pugh, and I represent Joe Walsh. And you've known Mr. Walsh for a long time, is that right?
Yes.
You were co-workers in the 8th District, I think almost since you got there, is that right?
Yes.
And throughout the years that you and Joe worked together, you enjoyed a nice working relationship.
Yes.
And after this incident where Mr. McDonald was shot, Joe continued to work with you in the 8th District for another year at least, right?
Yes.
And you know that Joe lived in the 8th District with his family, is that right?
Yes.
You know his wife and his girls too.
Don't know his family.
Okay, but you know that he lives in the 8th District and you know where he lives,
Yes.
is that right? And I want to clear up a couple of things. You were asked on direct examination, which maybe seems like hours ago, this question about whether or not reports that were written about interviews of you, whether anybody went over those reports. Remember those questions a long time ago?
Yes.
Okay, now, you're a patrol officer who's been an active patrol officer for many, many years in the 8th District, correct?
Yes.
And as a patrol officer, you investigated all sorts of crimes, is that right?
Yes.
And part of your investigative duties is you've taken statements from witnesses, is that right?
Yes.
And you always take the information that you get from the witnesses and you put them in your official reports, is
Yes.
that right? And you submit those reports and they go to 35th in Michigan or wherever, head to court or whatever those papers go to, is that right?
Yes.
As a matter of protocol, you don't go back to the witnesses and ask them to go back over your reports with you, do you?
Correct.
Okay. When you do a report as a police officer, you type up your report and you submit it, correct?
Yes,
And that's your understanding of exactly what happened in this case. Is that right?
yes,
Okay, so there's nothing different about the police work that you observed in this case than every other police case that you've ever done. Isn't that right?
correct.
Now, I want to ask you this term that you used. You used swaying and you demonstrated for us what swaying was. Would swaying also be swinging?
Yes,
Because I would use swinging, and if I could, you showed us how Mr. McDonald, when you pulled up, he was holding a knife and he was doing so in his right hand. Is that right?
yes,
And do you remember when you looked, was he holding the knife with an underhand grip or an overhand grip?
I don't remember.
Okay, but you demonstrated for us, and if I could do it now, that as Mr. McDonald was swinging or swaying the knife, he was doing so in a direction from his right to his left. Is that correct?
Yes,
And you were approaching with Rick Viramontes from the south. Is that right?
yes,
So you're coming towards Laquan McDonald. Is that right?
yes,
Now, south of Laquan McDonald was Officer Walsh. Is that right?
yes,
And his partner that night was Van Dyke, correct?
yes,
So from what you and from the direction you and Viramontes are coming from, you are observing Laquan McDonald walking towards Mr. Walsh, Officer Walsh, and Officer Van Dyke. Is that right?
southbound, he was
Yeah.
walking.
And the knife that Laquan McDonald was either swinging or swaying, he was doing so from his right to his left. Is that right?
Yes,
And Van Dyke and Joe Walsh were to Mr. McDonald's left. Is that correct?
yes,
Okay, so the knife was actually moving from a direction further away from Joe Walsh and his partner towards Joe Walsh and his partner, correct?
back and forth.
Yeah, and then back again, correct? And at some point in time, you made an observation of Laquan McDonald turning to his left, which would have been towards Joe Walsh and his partner. Is that right?
Yes,
Okay. Now, if I can, I would like you, to the best of your ability, to try to recall your perception and of the events as they occurred back on October 20th of 2014. When you first saw the individual that we now know as Laquan McDonald, you described him as an assailant with a knife. Is that right?
yes, that's what that says.
Okay, that's correct. That's
Okay.
how you would describe him based upon what you're seeing as a police officer arriving at scene, right?
Yes,
And if I'm not mistaken, you and Rick Viramontes were responding to the scene because you had been told over the radio that there was an offender with a knife. Is that right?
yes,
Right? And that officers needed assistance,
yes,
and you and Officer Viramontes were there to provide that assistance for that situation.
yes,
And when you first saw this individual that we've now know as Laquan McDonald, did he appear to you to be dazed or possibly on some kind of drugs?
yes,
And you were able to make that observation almost immediately upon your arrival at the scene. Is that right?
yes,
And as you're driving north on Pulaski towards the location where Mr. McDonald is approaching Joe Walsh and his partner, you were able to easily discern that what Laquan McDonald had in his hand was a knife. Is that right?
yes,
And your perception at that moment, when you saw Laquan McDonald approaching the location of Joe Walsh and his partner, you perceived Laquan McDonald to be a threat based upon your personal observations. Is that correct?
When I first arrived,
Yes,
when he was a threat
yes.
to me or others? Just a threat?
Just a threat in general.
Yes,
Okay. Now, you were able to, as you were driving northbound on Pulaski, to make some observations of how it was that Laquan McDonald was walking southbound on Pulaski, weren't you?
I'm sorry. Can you
Sure.
repeat
As
that?
you and your partner Rick Viramontes were driving towards the scene where ultimately there was a shooting on Pulaski, you made some observations of how Laquan McDonald was walking. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And did it look to you like he was kind of moving everywhere and he was going back and forth and he was swaying?
He was walking southbound, swinging the knife. That's what I observed.
Okay, do you remember observing that Laquan McDonald was kind of moving everywhere, so he was kind of going back and forth, swaying? Do you remember that? You remember making that observation?
If that's what that says there.
No,
Yeah,
no,
but he was.
I want to ask you now, just remember the ground rules, that I'm asking you now, is that what you remember seeing? You remember seeing Laquan McDonald moving everywhere, kind of going back and forth, swaying. Do you remember that?
I remember him just walking south, swinging the knife.
Okay. Now you do remember testifying before the federal grand jury at 219 South Dearborn, is that right?
Yes.
And you did that back on June 24th of 2015, right?
Yes.
And that was less than a year after these events happened, right?
Yes.
And you got to agree with me, your memory is going to be better back in 2015 than it was now about the events of 2014. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Okay. Now, if I could call your attention, page 59. I'm going to ask you if you remember being asked some questions by a woman by the name of April Perry, and let me know if Ms. Perry asked you this question and you provided this answer. Ms. Perry, was he like parallel to them, or was he going directly towards them? Do you remember Ms. Perry asking you that question?
I don't remember.
59.
Actually, bottom of 58 into 59, Mr. Saber. Sorry. And then you gave this answer. The way I saw him in the angle, it seemed like he was like kind of moving everywhere. So he was kind of going back and forth, swaying. So he was coming towards their direction. Do you remember being asked that question and giving that answer in the federal grand jury?
Yes. 'Cause
Okay.
he was walking south.
Towards them.
Well, southbound, and it was.
The answer that I just gave, I read it, okay? Is that the answer you gave back in 2015 when you testified before the federal grand jury?
Yes.
Okay.
That's what.
And again, Mr. McKay already asked you, that was a proceeding just like this. It was under oath. You were asked questions and you gave answers, right?
Yes.
Memory was better in 2015 about what happened in 2014 than it is in 2018, correct?
I just remember what I remember.
Okay. You do remember giving the answer I just read, right? Okay.
That's what that says. Yes.
Okay, thank you. Now, when you gave that answer about this man that was moving in the direction of the police officers, the police officers that Laquan McDonald was moving in the direction of, Joe Walsh was one of those police officers. Is that right?
Yes.
And prior to hearing any shots fired, you definitely heard the commands, drop the knife, drop the knife. Is that right?
Yes.
And you never, ever saw Mr. McDonald comply with that police command. Is that right?
Correct.
And actually, as a matter of fact, based upon what you observed, Mr. McDonald actually held the knife all the way to the ground. Is that right?
Yes.
And when you saw Mr. McDonald laying on the ground, you still perceived Mr. McDonald as a threat while he was still on the ground because he still had the knife. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Okay. So when you got to the scene after hearing drop the knife, you got out of your vehicle. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, when you got out of your vehicle, I think, if I'm not mistaken, you tripped a little bit and kind of missed exactly what was happening for a second. Is that right?
Yes.
So you never ever saw the first shot get fired, right?
Exactly. Yes.
So if you didn't see the first shot get fired, you didn't see what Mr. McDonald may or may not have done right before that shot, correct?
Correct.
And, but you definitely, before you sort of tripped and lost sight for a moment, you definitely saw this offender, Laquan McDonald, moving closer to the officers, waving the knife while being told to put it down, but he didn't comply, and that's why he got shot. Remember that?
That I said that's why he got shot?
Yeah. Well,
That's what I stated, then that's what I
okay,
stated.
well, let's see if we can refresh your recollection. You were asked already. You remember on, let's say, January 8th of 2015, being asked questions by Assistant State Attorney William Delaney and some FBI agents. Remember that?
Yes,
Right here in this building. Correct?
yes,
And do you remember telling Mr. Delaney and the FBI agents that Fontaine, that's you, right?
yes,
Saw the offender moving closer to the officer, waving the knife, and the officer you're referring to in here is Jason Van Dyke, is that right?
I said officer.
Okay, well, if you said officer, what officer did you mean?
It was Joe and it was Officer Walton and Van Dyke.
Okay.
So,
And waving the knife while being told to put it down, and again, waving the knife, you're referring to Laquan McDonald, is that right?
yes,
And being told to put it down, but did not comply, that's McDonald not complying, right?
mhm, yes,
And then you said, which is why the offender was shot. Is that what you told the FBI and William Delaney?
if that's what that says, yes.
Okay, that's what this does say. You
Okay.
agree with me that if this says this, this is what you previously told the FBI and Assistant State Attorney Bill Flake?
Yes,
Okay. What you observed that evening with Officer Van Dyke and Laquan McDonald was what you would characterize as the use of lethal force of the police officer. Is that right?
yes,
And based upon your understanding of Chicago Police Department policy as it existed on October 20th, 2014, lethal force is appropriate and warranted when the offender has a weapon or can cause injury to somebody, whether it be an officer or a citizen. Is that your understanding on the night of the shooting of the policy?
yes,
And it was your belief, and it is your belief, that so long as an offender still has a weapon, they remain a threat of risk or a risk of death or serious injury to another.
yes,
That's your understanding.
yes,
And that was based upon your understanding on October 20th, 2014 of your training as a Chicago police officer up to that point in the 8th District as a patrol officer. Is that right? Now, you did not draw your weapon when you exited your vehicle. Is that right?
yes,
However, you were about to draw your weapon when the shots rang out. Is that correct?
yes,
And so you actually had your hand on your weapon at the time you heard the first shot. Is that right?
yes,
And I think we've already established, so as you exited your vehicle, you tripped over something. Is that right?
yes,
Fair to say that if you hadn't tripped and you jumped out, you had your weapon up. Would that be fair to say?
yes,
Okay. Now, after the shooting, if I could, would I be accurate in describing the scene on Pulaski around 40th, 41st Street as being chaotic?
yes,
And I think you told us you had been given multiple assignments. You were told to go maybe direct traffic. Is that right?
yes,
You were at another point told to follow the ambulance.
yes,
Correct. And then later on, you were told to be the paper car. Is that right?
yes,
Now, your assignment that evening was one of a patrol officer. Is that correct?
yes,
And Joe Walsh and Mr. Gaffney, Mr. Gaffney's here as well.
yes,
And you knew Officer Gaffney again in the 8th District for a long time before this evening. Is that correct?
yes,
You, Gaffney, and Walsh were all patrol officers, correct?
yes,
It was not the responsibility of you as a patrol officer to take witness statements from civilians on that evening, was it?
correct,
And that's because there were detectives on scene and superiors on scene, and it was their responsibility, not the patrol officer's responsibility, to take any witness statements. Is that correct?
correct,
In terms of you being on scene, you were on scene at the time of the shooting. You remained on scene for a period of time before leaving to follow the ambulance. Is that correct?
yes,
During the period of time that you were present on scene, you had at least started to do some kind of traffic control. Is that correct?
when we left the scene is when we started doing traffic control.
Right. And by this point in time, the traffic was backed up on Pulaski because of this incident, correct?
Yes, it was.
And your job on traffic control, whenever there's a crime scene, is to reroute civilian traffic away from the crime scene to protect the integrity of the crime scene. Is that correct?
Yes,
It is also to allow for emergency vehicles and other police vehicles to get to the scene. Is that right?
yes.
Was there anything unusual regarding this scene about the regular civilian traffic on Pulaski being directed and rerouted away from the scene?
No,
That is standard procedure in any type of situation where there has been a crime in the middle of the road. Is that right?
yes,
Not only did you not take any civilian witness statements that evening, you didn't see any civilian witnesses around to take statements from. Would that be correct?
correct.
Now, after you created your original case incident report, you were commanded to go back to the area. Is that right?
Yes,
Now, as a patrol officer who had at least some involvement in this incident, it was absolutely standard protocol for you as a patrol officer to have to go to Area 1. Is that right? Or Area Central, correct?
correct.
And when you got to Area Central, other patrol officers who were at one point in time down at this crime scene on Pulaski were also at Area Central. Is that right?
Correct.
And if I'm not mistaken, Area Central is on the second floor of the police station at 51st and Wentworth. Is that right?
Yes,
And it is a large room and it is an open area, correct?
yes,
There are rows of desks and computers.
yes,
And all of the officers were kind of all sitting together. Is that right? Just waiting.
yes,
And during that period of time where you were waiting with the other patrol officers, nothing was going on in terms of any discussion other than just small talk between fellow police officers. Would that be fair to say?
yes,
And at some point in time, some representatives from the Fraternal Order of Police showed up to explain what was going to go on regarding the investigation.
yes,
And that is also standard protocol, correct?
yes,
In this group of patrol officers that was waiting at Area Central, that was yourself, I think you told us. Is that right?
yes,
And you mentioned the names Viramontes, Mondragon, Sebastian, McElliott, correct?
yes,
All fellow officers in the 8th District,
yes,
correct? You knew all of them. You've been working with them for a long time.
yes,
Joe Walsh was there, is that right?
yes,
And Mr. Gaffney was there, right?
yes,
Jason Van Dyke, however, was not there in this group of officers that were sitting waiting. Is that also true?
correct.
While you were sitting with the group of officers that I've just mentioned to you, none of the officers, particularly including Joe Walsh, were discussing covering up this police shooting by Jason Van Dyke, were they?
No,
Your Honor, if I could have just a moment, please.
Can you take the time?
Thank you. Thank you very much, officer.
Okay, Mr. Fahey?
Judge, I have no question, but this will adopt the cross-examination.
In your honor, I would adopt Mr. Hughes' cross-examination on behalf of David Miller.
Okay. Okay, any redirect?
Yes, just. Just like to show the witness, state exhibit 813R-1.
813R.
-1. Ms. Fontane, you recall being, or Officer Fontane, you recall being asked questions regarding seeing Laquan McDonald on the night of October 20, 2014, turn and fall. Is that correct?
just a moment.
I'd like to show you the video, and Judge, is it possible if she could come down?
Step down?
Step down off the witness stand and point on the video.
Yes, you can step down.
Can you come down off the witness stand, please? And we're going to roll the video, and can you tell us to stop at the point when you see him turn? Okay. All right. Disable. All right. And you see him turning right there. Is that correct? You could see him.
Yeah.
And how would you describe that turn?
Turn.
All right. Would you describe that as attacking?
No.
Okay. And could you see the knife at the time that he's twisting? That's your word, right? Twisting. Okay. And would you describe him as going toward the officers or away from the officers?
Away.
Did you know at the time you saw him twisting why he was twisting?
No.
And can you tell on this video why he was twisting?
No.
Thank you. Yeah. Do you recall being asked some questions regarding proper police work in maintaining a perimeter at a crime scene?
Yes.
And you recall being asked questions about directing traffic around the crime scene and around the perimeter?
Yes.
Now, if there are civilian witnesses inside the perimeter of a crime scene, what duty or obligation do you have with respect to those witnesses?
To take their information down?
Would you shoo those witnesses away?
No.
Would you tell them to leave the scene?
No.
Would you consider them part of the perimeter?
Yes.
Would that be proper police work?
Yes.
You recall being asked some questions, I believe by Mr. McKay, about what you did not do after learning that there were these statements being attributed to you.
Yes.
Recall that line of questioning?
Yes.
And you indicated in response to these questions that you didn't do any of the things he asked. Is that right?
Correct.
At the time, were you represented by a lawyer?
Yes.
Or were you acting on advice of your counsel?
Yes.
Oh, I got objected.
That's sustained and stricken.
Thank you.
You recall being asked some questions regarding how long it took you to write your case.
Yes.
You recall, I believe it was Mr. McKay, but I'm not quite positive, being read your transcript from the Inspector General taken by Mr. Peter Newmer and Christopher Brown.
Yes.
On March 16, 2016.
Yes.
And you recall Mr. McKay read that you indicated it was about an hour, correct?
Yes.
Well, I'd like to take you back a few questions for completeness. Do you recall being asked this question? I'll keep going on this line of question by Mr. Newman. How long did it take you to complete this case report? Your answer, I'm not sure. I'm not sure. Mr. Newman, give me your best estimate. Your response, maybe an hour.
Yes.
You recall that? Again, for completeness, you recall being asked questions from that same grand jury, the same Inspector General interview. The question was, you did not see him raise his right arm. Did you see McDonald on the night of October 20th make any attacking movements toward Officer Van Dyke? And your response, was yes. You recall Mr. McKay asking you and reading those questions and answers.
Yes.
And do you recall, for completeness, the next question, tell us about those attacking movements? Your answer, well, he was walking southbound, swaying the knife. Response, okay. Recall that?
Yes.
Did you ever, on the night of October 20th or any time thereafter, tell Detective March that Laquan McDonald used the knife to attack either Officer Van Dyke or Officer Walsh?
There's an exception, as particularly as it relates to Mr. Walsh, and with fact not evidence.
It also.
No, it's not exactly what's in the report, so it's not accurate. As to what you're referring to, what's in the GPR, that's sustained.
Did you ever tell Detective March that offender ignored raised right arm toward Van Dyke as if attacking Van Dyke?
No, I never stated that.
Did you ever tell Detective March that McDonald ignored the verbal direction and instead raised his right arm toward Officer Van Dyke as if attacking Van Dyke?
Judge, objection, this has been asked and answered on the
That's sustained.
No further questions. Oh, wait, please. Just one more question. You recall being asked questions by Mr. McKay regarding not recalling statements made to Detective March. The question read to you by Mr. McKay was, so when you say you don't recall making that statement to Detective March, is it possible that you made the statement that McDonald raised his right arm toward Officer Van Dyke as if attacking Van Dyke? No. Your answer was no. Question, no, it's not possible. Your answer was no. You recall being asked those questions by Mr. McKay?
Yes.
Judge, objection. This is an improper representation.
I don't think that's the issue here. I think you're just directing, if I'm correct, if I'm wrong, I think you're just directing to a certain point of cross-examination. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So based on that, it's overruled. I am not going to consider it as any type of rehabilitation.
I just repeated the question.
Now, I understand what you're doing, but I just want the record to be clear that I'm not going to consider it for any other purpose.
For completeness, do you recall prior to those questions being asked by Mr. Newmer? Yep, I got you. That's fine. So the sentence in full reads, McDonald ignored the verbal direction, instead raised his right arm toward Officer Van Dyke as if attacking Van Dyke. Your answer, yes. Question, and you're saying you did not make that statement to Detective March on the night of October 20th, 2014. Is that correct? Your answer, yes. I don't recall telling him that.
Yes.
Do you recall that? So when you
Well,
say
Ms. Brown-Holmes, I'm not exactly sure where that statement, you think you're asking her, did she make the statement or did she not make that statement? I'm not exactly sure what you're directing her to.
Mr. McKay.
No, I understand what Mr. McKay did. And you're saying for the doctrine of
For the
completeness.
doctrine of completeness.
But completeness from what document or what
Oh, I'm
testimony?
sorry, from the same Office of Inspector General report on March 16, 2016, where she was interviewed by Peter Newmer and Christopher Brown.
On March 16th?
Correct,
2016?
correct.
And what's your objection, Mr. McKay?
It's improper redirect, Judge. It has nothing to do with the doctrine of completeness.
I have to say, I just have to say it's hard for me to rule on this one because I don't completely understand your question. And if I don't understand it, I'm not sure if the witness understands it. So rephrase
Okay.
or ask another question.
Judge, I'll withdraw.
Okay. Anything further, Ms. Brown-Holmes?
Just 1 second.
All right, take your time.
No, Judge, nothing.
Okay, any recross, Mr. McKay?
Did you see any civilian witnesses that night at the scene after the shooting?
No.
Thank you.
Nothing further.
Any recross, Mr. Pugh?
I just have a couple quick questions.
Okay, give me a second, then I gotta just update my notes here. Okay,
May we publish 813R dash cam? If we could just back it up a little bit. That's perfect right there. We can stop right here. Officer Fontane. In People's Exhibit 813R dash cam, can we see your vehicle in this?
yes,
Would you tell us, I'll approach it, and just for the purpose of the record, is this your vehicle driving right up the middle of Pulaski with the headlights on?
Yes,
Would you agree with me that the perspective of this video, 813R, is very different from the perspective that you and Rick Viramontes had as you were traveling northbound?
yes,
You, for instance, were able to discern that Mr. McDonald was moving the knife across the front of his body from a right to left motion, but that's not shown on the video. Is that right? Because you don't see his belly.
I saw it in front of him.
What's that?
I
You
did
did,
see
but
it.
the camera's behind Mr. McDonald,
Oh.
right?
Exactly.
So you have a different vantage point than the video. Is that right?
Yes.
In addition, you do see Mr. Walsh's, Officer Walsh's, and Officer Van Dyke's vehicle, which is from the center of the video to the left. Is that right?
Yes,
Do you agree with me that Joe Walsh had a different vantage point and line of sight than you had of Laquan McDonald?
yes,
And would also agree with me that Joe Walsh and his partner Van Dyke were closer to Laquan McDonald than you were. Is that right?
yes,
And that you actually were just racing up on the scene with Viramontes driving, correct?
yes,
And attempting to exit your vehicle and tripping, correct?
yes,
And based on what you saw in the video and what you observed out there that night, it does appear as if Joe Walsh actually stayed very visually focused on Laquan McDonald from the moment he exited his police vehicle. Isn't that correct?
from this video?
Yeah, from that video.
Yes,
You would agree with me that it did appear that Mr. Walsh actually had greater attention on Laquan McDonald than you had, who was just arriving on the scene.
yes,
Correct?
yes.
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Fahey, any recross
No, Judge, I would just adopt Recross
of,
co-counsels.
okay,
Your Honor, can I adopt Mr. Pugh's recross on behalf of the March?
yes,
There was only one read. He gave me an extra read. It was just
it was just recross.
gave me a read.
That's correct.
I made a false statement.
Okay, so it was recross of defendant March. Okay. Anything further, Ms. Brown-Holmes?
No, not from
With
that
this-
witness.
All right, you're excused. You may step down. Thank you. That's as far as we're going. It's almost 8 o'clock. This court reporter and my staff have been here since, I don't know what time the sheriffs get here. It has to be probably at least 8 o'clock. But this court reporter's been working nonstop other than a 1 hour break since 9:30 this morning. Same thing with my clerk. We're done for today. Okay? I know that there was supposed to be another witness. I thought that witness was going to be called first and that we would have been done by around, I think maybe it would have been 6, 7 o'clock at the latest. So I apologize if there's any inconvenience. It's a full day. We're done.
11 o'clock tomorrow?
Order of court, November 29th, with per bench commenced and continued at 11 o'clock. Do you need a subpoena continued on the record?
Yes, yes.
I'll do that. Can you tell me what witnesses you have, and I'll do it on the record right now. That's fine. Absolutely. Those were the best words of your little baby. What? We're done.